$250 million. That's exactly how much could go up in smoke as the fighting continues in Yemen. You see, Somalia exports the bulk of its livestock to that Middle Eastern country, and the continuing war over there essentially means that markets are closed. And that's a terrible, terrible problem for Somali livestock producers who rely on Yemen as a vital transit point to get their goods into markets in the Middle East. We'll be finding out exactly how they're coping live from Mogadishu in just a moment. Welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Raman Yang. Here's what's coming up. Belgium yanks funding from Burundi as protests over there enter their third week. We'll be looking at Egypt's traditional shipbuilding industry. It's on the verge of extinction. Right then, now, between the airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition and fighting with the Houthis in Yemen, Somalia's livestock and fishing sectors are on the brink of collapse. You see, for years, Yemen has served as a vital corridor and a vital market as well for Somalia's exports. And instability over there now affects a broad range of businesses in Somalia. Our starting point tonight is Mogadishu, where Mohammed Hirmoge filed this report.
Impoverished yet strategically placed, the tussle for power in Yemen has serious economic impacts on Somalia. Somalia's economy is dependent on Yemen. It's the transit point for Somalia's animal exports. Exports of livestock and fisheries have since been affected by the crisis in Yemen.
We can witness the impact already. Of course, no one can access a war zone, so it has since affected animal exports from Somalia. But the fisheries sector has suffered the most. Yemen was the processing point for Somalia's fish before the final products are exported to other countries. If the war goes on, it will have serious economic implications on us.
Somalia largely exports through the Berbera and Bosaso ports to transit ports in Yemen.
From the port of Berbera, a ship carrying 5,000 goats used to leave for the Yemen port of Marka every night. And from Bosaso, another ship carrying similar number of cattle would set sail for Aden. All that has now stopped.
Livestock is the mainstay of Somalia's economy, making over 40% of the country's gross domestic product. An estimated $360 million of revenue came from the export of livestock from Somalia last year. Businessmen are worried that might soon change.
The fighting started before the checks were paid. The fighting also brought about a huge inflation in Yemen, affecting sales and businesses. For 4 weeks, there have been no exports to Yemen.
A recent boom in livestock export was expected to boost business and open markets of Somali livestock to the Arab world. But with the crisis in Yemen, that may not be the case. From the ports of Mogadishu, Berbera and Bosaso, Somalia exported 5 million animals last year. That's the highest number of animals exported over the last 20 years. Businessmen say that's due to trade boost with the Gulf states. But the unfolding crisis in Yemen threatens livestock export from Somalia. Mohammed Hirmoge, CCTV, Mogadishu.
And Mr. Hirmoge himself now joins us from the seaside capital of Mogadishu. Hirmoge, for years now, we've seen refugees from Somalia heading to Yemen, and that trend, according to UNHCR, still continues. But now we're also seeing the reverse happening, with Yemenis sprinting off seeking shelter in Djibouti and Somalia. How many have come back home or sought refuge in Somalia to date?
Well, Rama, it's known that more than 150,000 Somali refugees live in Yemen. But since the airstrikes in Yemen, since the Houthi rebels took over certain cities in Yemen, and the Saudi-led coalition reacted to that, together with the president of Yemen, Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi, and it's estimated that about 3,800 refugees, Somali refugees, have come back to safer regions of Puntland and Somaliland. However, there are reports that many more are still in Yemen and could be willing to come over here, but are lacking the means. So that points to a very significant fact that still many thousands, tens of thousands of Somali refugees are still trapped in Yemen and might be willing to come over, by the way, and who have no means to come over here. So the government promised to ferry them over to Mogadishu, but until now we have only 3,800 Somali refugees who have come to the safe areas of Puntland and Somaliland.
Indeed, also worth pointing out that according to the latest data from UNHCR, there are about 236,000 or so Somali refugees in Yemen. Hirmoge, among all the Middle Eastern markets for Somalia's livestock exports, give us a sense of just how vital Yemen is. Assuming the Yemeni market is out of the equation completely, can livestock traders divert their produce elsewhere?
Well, Rama, Yemen is strategically important to Somalia. Yemen is used by Somalia as a transit port en route to other Arab and Gulf states. Talk of proximity, Yemen is closer to Somalia as well, because the ports of Berbera and Bosaso are closer to the ports of Mecca and Mukalla and Aden in Yemen. And as such, businessmen told me that when the ships set sail from the ports of Berbera and Bosaso, just less than 30 hours, they can dock in the ports of Mukalla or even Aden. Therefore, talk of proximity, they are that close, and therefore that's why Yemen is an easy market for the Somali animals. The fisheries department is yet another thing, because according to an official I spoke to this morning of the Somali Chamber of Commerce and Industry, he told me that it's important, Yemen is important to the fisheries industry of Somalia, in that Yemen was a processing zone for Somali fish before they get exported to the outside world. Therefore, we are seeing here that Yemen is strategically placed, strategically important to the economic growth of Somalia. Speaking about other options, yes, Somali traders are now venturing to other options. They are talking about taking their livestock to Oman, UAE, or even Saudi Arabia, but we'll have to see whether that can work for them in as much as efficient way as Yemen had been working for them.
Indeed. Let's move back to 2011. Back then, Somalis were being caught in the crossfire in the fighting between the two sides in the country. Is the same thing happening right now?
Something could be happening or even worse, because back in 2011, the Somali government didn't play any role in the fighting in Yemen. But right now, the Somali government has joined the Saudi-led campaign. Therefore, it's easier for the Somali refugees to be seen as enemies and not as refugees. That's a very significant point. And also, the other time, it was just more of a sectarian civil war in Yemen. But right now, there are foreign forces involved, and that puts the Somalis in Yemen, largely the refugees, in a very precarious position.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being, but thank you for the update. That's Mohammed Hirmoge live in Mogadishu. We'll certainly be keeping tabs on that story from that end of the world. Let's take you to Central Africa now. Protesters in Burundi have ignored a government order for an immediate end to protests, and they did that by blocking a major trunk road. Now, these protests, as you might recall, erupted in late April after President Pierre Nkurunziza announced that he would seek a third term in power. Burundi's constitution stipulates in black and white that presidents must step down after 2 5-year terms in office. But Nkurunziza's backers disagree, and the courts support them. They argue that since he wasn't elected by direct universal suffrage in his first term, that one doesn't count. Residents of Musaga, a neighborhood in Bujumbura, have defied the ban on street protests, taking to the main road. They were met by a line of riot police there. The blockade delayed trucks for several hours before the military arrived to escort them through the protesters. Now, to date, 19 people have been killed, 216 more have been injured. Protesters are demanding that the president withdraw his bid for a third term in office. Still on Burundi, at the same time, Belgium has suspended aid to the country in response to the violent clashes that we have been reporting on for the last fortnight. Belgium is the first country to suspend aid support to Burundi's government. It had pledged $4.5 million to fund the organization of the forthcoming elections. 50% of that money has already been delivered. But given, of course, developments in the last 2 weeks, Belgium's government now says the remainder will not be forthcoming. This decision was arrived at after the European Electoral Observation Mission for Burundi concluded that conditions there did not allow election candidates to campaign. Belgium will also be pulling out of a $5.5 million police cooperation deal, which was a joint initiative with the Netherlands. The decision comes after the UN reported that police had killed 11 protesters and could not claim that those killings were a legitimate act of self-defense. Right, then let's expand this conversation. Kofa Mrenje is live in the capital of Burundi, Bujumbura, right now. Kelly Lemon, of course, is live in London as well. Kofa, how's the government reacted to these aid cuts from Belgium and the threat of sanctions by the United States?
Well, Rama, a bit of some worry here from the government. Burundi is a country that depends largely on funds from the European Union and the US. However, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has made it clear here that the funds have not been entirely suspended. he says they have been halted for some time until just before the elections, and they've been given some conditions which they have to meet as government before that money is released to them. 3 points have been put forward by the EU and Belgium. That one is that protesters have to be heard. They need to let them have their word without any intimidation. Number two, they say they need to have freedom of expression. Those radio stations that have been closed down need to be let to operate and resume broadcasts. And number three, and finally, is that those who have been arrested during the protests need to be released before that money is given to the government. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs says they will engage all stakeholders who are involved in this whole process to try as much as possible to come up with a solution before the elections.
Indeed, that's an interesting development considering the fact that earlier in the day there was actually no direct comment from a government spokesman. Kelly, coming to you, do we know of any other plans by EU member states to also cut off aid to Burundi?
Well, this is a suspension rather than cutting funds altogether, which is an important distinction to make. Belgium says the funds were specifically for the election, an election that they feel can no longer progress. And in terms of other EU members, there's a strong chance the Netherlands could follow. Let's not forget Europe is the biggest donor to the country, which is one of the poorest in the world. Diplomats say any aid cuts will be targeted to avoid hurting the population. So there is a good chance more European countries will follow, especially as the US is already threatening sanctions.
Indeed. Kofa, East African states, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, well, Burundi, we don't know if they're actually going to come for the meeting, but the rest of the East African Community members are meeting in Tanzania on Wednesday. Give us a sense of the bloc's position. Are they explicitly supporting Nkurunziza's third term, or they're simply walking into this with an amorphous position of saying Burundi needs to be peaceful?
Well, it's not really clear at the moment what exactly is going to come up from that meeting. However, we understand and the three presidents from the East African bloc, President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, and President of the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, have made it clear that they are not happy with the developments in Burundi. They fear that whatever is happening here could affect the East African bloc. But everyone here will be just waiting to hear what will come up out of that meeting once they meet. It is also unclear at the moment whether the president here will be attending that meeting or not.
Indeed. Kelly, beyond aid cuts, we do know that, of course, a fairly big chunk of Burundi's budget is financed by aid. But beyond the aid suspensions, what other pressure can the EU bring to bear to resolve this crisis in Burundi?
Well, the US gives about $80 million a year in terms of equipment and training for the army. Now, that's already threatening, the US is already threatening sanctions, and that's really the next step countries are looking at. The challenge diplomats have at the moment is choosing where to cut and how to put pressure on the country without hurting those that need the aid most. Because the country is so reliant on aid, these moves and the threat of sanctions certainly will have an impact. Like you say, African states are due to meet this Wednesday, so we're likely to see leaders wait until that meeting before announcing any additional measures.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your input. Kelly Lemon live in London. And of course, Kofa Mrenjo is keeping tabs on developments, disturbing developments, we should point out, in Burundi. Just a quick recap on that story. We're talking about aid suspensions, not cuts. Interesting distinction coming through in the last couple of hours. Make a quick run through the markets here for you now. Relatively tepid day, if we can put it that way, in the markets. Aside from the JSE All Africa All Share Index, which was up by about 2/3 today, everyone else was firmly in the red. However, year to date, we're approaching the midyear point in the year. JSE up about 10%. The EGX 30, however, in the red. It's lost about 150 or so basis points. Nigeria and Nairobi have both posted gains so far this year. Tour operators in South Africa are showing off the country's diversity, but will you go there? And Libyans who are absolutely tired of the fighting back home are now finding business opportunities in Turkey. We'll have their story next.
sustainable development and a commitment to developing partnerships with Africa. Some of the key phrases already used at the Africa Global Business Forum here in Dubai.
There is a need for a predictable environment in which investors have to put their money.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa from the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Now, let's head over to Durban, South Africa, where over 1,000 exhibitors are showcasing the best that Africa's tourism sector has to offer to global buyers at the Indaba Travel Show. But as Angelo Coppola reports, South Africa's tourism sector players are worried that April's deadly bout of xenophobia and strict new travel visa requirements will collectively hurt their business.
Tourism ministers from several countries are looking for closer cooperation on a range of issues, from opening the air routes to greater regional integration and easing of travel restrictions. But recent xenophobic attacks remain fresh in the minds of most.
What we saw a few weeks ago, unfortunate, because we do have poverty, we do have unemployment, and there was a flare-up. The good news, though, is that there was a very rapid response to it. It's not the sentiment, and South Africans came out in their hundreds of thousands to say that's not us. They don't speak for us. And so I think that was also observed internationally. And so we stick with that. We are part of Africa, and that we welcome Africans to South Africa.
The whole recent attacks on foreign nationals is also something that really is worrying us as business, because what does all these things do? They harm the image of South Africa. In the middle of all this competition, that's the least those are the last thing we want. Business is tough as it is.
Recent changes to South African visa laws and new regulations on travelling with children is affecting tourism. There are also changes which mean that tourists have to apply in person to visit this country.
We're having that discussion with the Department of Home Affairs, recognizing the need to tighten up our security and to be very security conscious. We think that there are better ways of doing it, so that whatever we do in order to secure our country's security interests, that we don't do it in such a way that it has a negative impact on tourism.
We signaled out the onslaught of the in-person visa applications, the unabridged birth certificate, and the ongoing, if you like, the lingering effect of Ebola, and now the challenge of attacks of nationals being the major challenge that we're going to face in 2015. So we're a bit nervous as business for the remainder of the year, but we remain confident. Basically because, fortunately for South Africa, unlike maybe other countries in the African continent, we have a very robust and vibrant domestic travel.
Travel shows and travel indabas generally are big marketing sessions where people get together and ramp up and talk up their particular properties and their particular country. South Africa at the moment is dealing with the after effects of xenophobia, as well as what's happening around the visa requirements, and those matters are being downplayed here at the Tourism Indaba. I'm Angelo Coppola for CCTV in Durban in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa.
The deteriorating situation in Libya has led some fleeing citizens to perhaps what we would describe as good tidings. You see, many of them have found themselves in Turkey, and the entrepreneurial ones are reaping from what they consider to be an investment haven due to the relatively stable political environment and a fairly interesting set of business incentives.
Libyan businessman Mustafa Al-Tahuni left his country after the outbreak of armed conflict and came to Turkey to live and work. The instability and worsening security situation prompted many Libyans like him to set up shop in Turkey looking for alternative markets. Turkey is considered suitable because of the many opportunities and government incentives to facilitate investment, especially in the area of immigration and tax exemption.
In reality, the main purpose for me and for many Libyans to be here is the security situation in Libya. As you know, the security situation is bad right now.
Al-Tahoni runs a private tourism and logistics company in Istanbul. He worked in Libya as a civil engineer in construction and real estate.
There is a lack of income for me as an engineer, and though I had a company in Libya and focused 100% on foreign companies, there aren't any foreign companies at all. Therefore, there is no work. And there weren't any alternatives, as I couldn't change my business field as well.
Talal Agag, a former director at a Libyan health insurance company, also left because of the security situation and the lack of good governance and opportunities.
The main factor is the economic factor, and economic stability will get its stability from government stability, and this stability requires security, and it's a series of connected loops. And before the February Revolution, the fundamental basis for investment wasn't fully available, or at least enough to support healthy investment. After the revolution and what the situation came to, it made the situation worse, and in some areas, almost impossible.
He went to Turkey on holiday and was planning to go to another European country to set up his own business. But once in Istanbul, he decided to move to the city permanently because of the favorable economic climate. Agag now works as a consultant at a large private health insurance company and wants to establish his own firm. But the Central Bank of Libya is trying to reduce the migration of capital from Libya. It grants credit and has eased banking restrictions to stimulate the Libyan economy.
The Central Bank of Libya has to be transparent and honest in this regard to stimulating the private sector. We opened the bank credit with certain conditions, but it was very unfortunate that there were some ill-intentioned people that pretended to be businessmen and set up fake companies.
That forced the bank to set restrictions on helping businesses and currently focuses on food imports.
So it became a tradition, and this bad business mentality dominated the foreign currency exchange, thus leading to a rising of the dollar against the Libyan dinar. And the Libyan dinar has dropped dramatically with the current crisis in the country.
Libya's state budget has been hit hard by a fall in oil revenues caused by ongoing fighting and a slump in global oil prices. Voldy Karolsa, CCTV.
Quick run through commodities. This time last week we were sitting here and wondering, will we actually crack $70 a barrel on Brent crude? Today, however, the markets are proving to be as fickle as ever. 64.81, down almost a 4 percentage point on Brent crude contracts today. Next, we'll be looking at Egypt's traditional shipbuilding industry. It's on the verge of extinction, but can it recover? Welcome back. Egyptian shipbuilders, the traditional sort, are calling for more government support to help prevent the country's historic wooden boat building trade from essentially dying out. The artisans say that government regulations, a lack of support and reduced sales have forced many craftsmen to abandon the industry and look for employment elsewhere.
These shipwrights begin early as dawn breaks along Anfushi Beach in Alexandria. The craft started more than 2,000 years ago, building ships for the Ottoman Empire. Today, however, they're used as commercial yachts and fishing boats. The builders do everything by hand.
Shipmaking is a very important industry, and it's an artistic one too. We carry out the work without computers, just from our experience. We create blueprints, then build the beams and shape the cabins and so forth, purely from our experience.
But many within the industry say they aren't being supported by the government. They want better workshop facilities, so they don't have to work outside. At the moment, shipwrights can only work in good weather.
We need technology. We need to advance this craft and become exposed to the world, instead of sitting around because the ships aren't being licensed, which will lead to the extinction of this craft. Instead, the government should improve this industry and clear up the slums. It can arrange the workers in the workshops and build hangars such as those in Turkey, in order to build ships inside the hangars away from the weather conditions which cause problems. I finish the work and sand the wood and everything is perfect. Then it rains and the wood becomes wet and warped and I have to start over.
Many shipbuilding areas have been turned into slums following the city's massive expansion.
The coastline is virtually dead for more than 5 or 6 years, since even before the revolution. The work has been very sparse because of the situation that we are in. As you can see, the area has become a slum and customers are afraid to come here. Only very few people come here from the surrounding areas.
Alexandria's shipyard is now scattered with unfinished ships, abandoned by their owner and builders. To add to the industry woes, obtaining a ship license has become more difficult due to new government guidelines.
No craftsmen are working at the moment. As you can see, all the work on the ships has stopped. Some were working in the hopes of getting a license, but no one is getting a license these days. All these ships are just lying around now.
As a result of the stagnation that has taken place during the last years, the craftsmen have begun to stray from this industry. Each one is looking for different industry in order to make a living. So therefore, there is a stagnation in production.
The uncertain political situation in the region has also drastically reduced the number of foreign orders.
Egypt is the only country that makes wooden ships like this. In the world probably. The rest of the world works with metal or fiber. There is no handmade work. Egypt is special because of it, but there is no awareness to the importance of this craft.
He says, sadly, unless something is done, the handcraft is headed for extinction. Susan Mungeli, CCTV.
As far as exclusivity is concerned, the dhow makers down in the coast of Kenya might probably disagree. Quick run through currencies here for you. Let's see what's going on some of these currencies. Gains for the US dollar today against the rand and the Kenyan shilling up by well over 0.75%. However, it did lose ground slightly against the naira, down by about a third to about 198.6 against the Nigerian unit. Now, here's what we're working on for tomorrow's program. We'll be with Zimbabwe's government. It plans to start extracting rents from new black farmers given land under a highly controversial redistribution exercise to help compensate former white farmers. We'll have the details on that program. Mali, on the other hand, is recording a decline in gold exports, partly due to much lower output from artisanal mining. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we welcome your feedback. Give us your story, ideas, what you think about what we do around here. Send it to globalbusinessafrica@cctv.com. And of course, as always, the news continues 24/7 on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you over there. See you in 23 hours. I'm Ramanyan.